Welcome to the Why Did I Get Cancer podcast. I'm Deborah Herlax-Enos, a small-town girl turned TV nutritionist and healthy living expert. I design health programs for the average guy or gal, including those average guys named Metallica. On September 1st, 2020, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I asked every oncologist the same question, why did I get cancer? But none of my doctors had good answers for me. I wanted answers, and that's why I started this podcast. I want to help you to lower your cancer risk and provide self-care tips for those in the battle. I'm getting answers, and I want to share them with you. Today's podcast really shocked me. It was about homeopathy. I interviewed a homeopathic physician. Her name is Dr. Sarah Trask. And I honestly didn't know a lot about homeopathy, but what I loved about today's podcast is that she talked a lot about putting your body in the position to heal itself, meaning getting enough rest, eating the right food, getting rid of toxic people in your life, all types of things, which of course we've talked about on this podcast before. But then Dr. Trask mentioned an incident that happened to her. She was in school learning to become a homeopathic physician. And she went back into class and she'd gotten food poisoning at lunch. And her professor said, "This is great. Let's cure you with homeopathy." And she said, excuse my language, it was kind of coming out both ends. And she said that he gave her a treatment and she felt better almost immediately. I got to tell you, when I hear stories like that, I want to know more. So you got to tune in. This is part one. It's a great 2-part series, and I hope to see you next week for part 2, but I hope you enjoy. Hey everyone, welcome to Why Did I Get Cancer? Today's guest is 3 years in the making, honestly. Her name is Sarah Trask. She is a homeopathic physician, and I'm an Instagram scroller, not a stroller. Maybe I'm a stroller. I'm an Instagram scroller, and I found her Instagram profile 3 years ago when I was starting this podcast, and I took a screenshot of it and I put it in my wish list of rock star guests that I wanted on my podcast. And I just kept following her and reading her content and was inspired. And we talked, Sarah, like 3 weeks ago. I was flying somewhere. We were talking at the SeaTac airport, and you said, I would love to do your podcast. So today's the day. Welcome to Why Did I Get Cancer? Yay.
Thanks so much for this, Deborah. I'm so excited.
I'm so excited too. And so homeopathy.
Huge topic.
Huge topic. Could you unpack a little bit of that for us? I used to know a lot more about it when I was getting my nutrition and health science degree. Fast forward, a few decades, and I need a refresher course. Tell us what it means.
And a lot of people don't know what it means. They often get me mixed up with a naturopath, or think I do a lot of dietary changes or supplementation. But homeopathy is actually a form of medicine in and of itself that was founded over 200 years ago. And basically it's energy medicine. So we use highly diluted past the point of material dose substances to kickstart the body's own immune response. So essentially we use plants, animal material, poisons, minerals, all kinds of different substances. And then they're diluted past the point of material dose. And you choose a substance based on what it causes in toxicity. So a really easy example would be we use a homeopathic Apis mellifica, which is made from a bee stinger for people with anaphylaxis. So, or people who have allergies or really strong allergies that cause all kinds of things that happen very quickly. So a sudden onset type of allergy. And if I were to give somebody a bee stinger who had a bee allergy, then they would die. They would go into anaphylaxis. So that's why they have to be diluted past the point of material dose. But what's beautiful about it is that if you give somebody a remedy and it's not the right remedy, it just does nothing. It's like taking nothing. It has to resonate with their frequency. And so, there's a huge difference between treating acute and chronic disease with homeopathy. acute treatments are sort of like a quick fix, for anything that's been around for under 6 weeks. And it comes on, some of them can come on suddenly, some can come on gradually, but basically it has a lifespan of about 6 weeks. And then those remedies are sort of in a grouping. And a few years ago, well, it was probably when my kids were little that I really shifted my mindset around helping other moms and people who are at home with kids and who in the middle of the night have a kid up screaming with an ear infection. I thought, like, oftentimes I didn't have all my remedies I needed at home. They would be in my office. And so it'd be midnight and my son would be screaming with an ear infection. And I'm like, oh, darn, I don't have any Hep Self. And it was very frustrating. And I decided to make a first aid kit. It was a very rudimentary one at the time, but over the years it's progressed. And a few years ago, I put together a very comprehensive first aid kit that comes with a course on homeopathy. It's about a 3.5-hour course that's free with the kit. And it teaches you how to use homeopathy, how the substances work, how they're made, what you should see if you have the right remedy versus the wrong remedy. And it's just great. It's so empowering for people to have this toolkit at home. So yeah, I was really excited to put that out a few years ago, and it's actually been really popular in the US.
So here's the question. Why wouldn't somebody, you've got a kid who wakes up in the middle of the night. Why use homeopathy versus running down to your local pharmacy and getting some eardrops? What's the difference?
Right. Well, modern medicine uses suppression. So they're suppressing the body's innate healing response. So when kids get a fever, that's their body trying to heal themselves. And so there are, ways to bring down a high fever with like a lukewarm bath or a homeopathic remedy without actually suppressing what the body is trying to do in order to heal. So homeopathy really is all about facilitating the body's healing mechanism. A good example of this would be, let's say you have an acute diarrhea, okay? And this is your immune system, right? It works like a pendulum. It's always swinging back and forth, and this is homeostasis. And let's say you have a diarrhea, okay? And so your body, when your body has diarrhea, it's actually attempting to heal itself by purging whatever is in it to get rid of it. So when you take an Imodium, which is an anti-diarrheal, meaning opposite, it causes a primary immune response. So it actually causes an opposite reaction. The same with anti-inflammatories or antibiotics or antidepressants, antipsychotics. Modern medicine uses the opposite approach, okay? So it causes this reaction to occur. The body will then always initiate what's called a secondary immune response and bring it back to balance. So again, the self-limiting aspect of the acute disease will just bring it back to balance. Your diarrhea has gone away. If you're over here and you have diarrhea, a homeopath would ask you questions like, what's the diarrhea like? Is there any pain? Is it happening in 20-minute intervals? Does it happen at a certain time of day? What brought it on? And then they would find a remedy that in nature causes that pattern of symptoms. So we have repertories and materia medica, like huge libraries of over 4,000 remedies that help us find that particular. And then we give it to you in such a minute dose because your body is already hugely sensitive to it. Okay. And then we trick the body into thinking it's getting a little more of what it already has to kickstart just the secondary immune response. And then it comes back into balance. So essentially, each time you take a remedy that's the right remedy, meaning it matches the pattern of the symptoms, you're actually teaching the body to work on its own. Each time you take it, your body learns a little bit more and a little bit more.
So are you saying then that it sounds like what you're saying is the body wants to heal itself?
Yes. Of course it does.
Okay. So
that's how God made us.
That is how God made us. Okay. So yeah, question was maybe a little tongue in cheek, but so our body, it sounds like maybe I have so many questions. I'm made of questions right now. So it sounds like if we put our body in the right position, I don't mean like a physical position, like laying down or standing up, but if we give it the tools,
Mm-hmm.
it can heal itself
Mm-hmm.
from most
Exactly.
things.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, another difference is most pharmaceuticals are made for a label or a box of symptoms, right? A homeopath actually doesn't treat the box. It tries to get, it treats the person.
Hmm.
Okay. So we try to pull the person away from the box and figure out what's unique to them, because every person has unique susceptibilities.
Mhm.
And I know that you probably know this too, because you have more than one child, and they're even though they have two same parents, they're completely different,
Mhm.
and they get different things, and they're susceptible to different things, and their sensitivities to certain things are vastly different. So a homeopath would really need to know, especially when taking a chronic case, but also when taking an acute case. But a chronic case is all about those intricacies of what makes you unique and individual, and what your weaknesses are in the face of what weakens you. We're trying to find something to strengthen your vitality, your vital force in the face of that.
Okay. So homeopathy is intended to strengthen the body,
Yes.
which pays off dividends for the rest of your life.
Mhm.
But my guess is that it's not fast, where you could take an Imodium or you could take something and you have immediate relief of symptoms. So it sounds like we might, with homeopathy, maybe need to be a little patient.
No. So with acute
Oh,
disease, yes,
okay.
it can.
Tell me more, Sarah.
Oh my gosh, homeopathy works within 5 minutes. So,
What?
and oh yes, so within 5 minutes, especially if you have to look at it from an energetic standpoint. So, if you have somebody who's had a fever come on suddenly or pain come on suddenly, if you find the right remedy, it's designed to work in the same way. So, we also have remedies that the symptoms come on suddenly in the crude form, in their toxic form. The symptoms come on suddenly. For instance, with diarrhea that's caused by food poisoning, that comes on suddenly. Arsenicum album, which is homeopathic arsenic, cures food poisoning in the same way. Within,
Wow.
I mean, I can remember one of the first weekends at school, I got food poisoning. We went out for lunch. I had a bad salad. I'm sure it was E. coli. I was green. I was both ends. Maybe too much information.
No,
Anyway,
we're good.
I came back to class and the teacher was so excited. He was like, let's treat her, class. And so he took my case and took the observatory symptoms as well as the symptoms that I shared with him, and put 2 pellets of arsenicum album in my bottle of water, and I sipped. And within 2 minutes, I was like, this is unbelievable. And I think that was the
Wow.
first acute that I had ever had treated. So yeah, and it's so beautiful when you see it work like that. I would say,
Especially that you had a real world experience. I would
yes.
imagine that at that point, if you had any doubts that this was the career for you,
Yeah.
you probably were just all in
Oh,
because,
I fell in love with homeopathy, but
yeah.
I actually saw a homeopath for my chronic complaints beforehand, which it was very powerful. It was very powerful. But I would say there's so many variables that come into play with how somebody would react to the right remedy, right? The correct match of that pattern.
Okay.
Um, Number one, I mean, I could name 100, but number one is, are they sharing the proper information? Are you taking the case properly? Are you asking the right questions?
Hmm.
Um, can they even communicate? With animals, they can't communicate. With babies, they can't communicate. Are you taking observatory symptoms? Is there a maintaining cause in their environment? So, if you're treating somebody's liver disease and they're continuing to drink alcohol, there's maintaining causes for things. If you're
Right.
treating a lung condition and they're living in a house with mold, again, there's maintaining causes for everything. So a person's vitality can be affected by what they're susceptible to and how much is coming at them all the time. But
Hmm.
essentially, when you take a chronic case or constitutional, you're figuring out what the generalities of that person are. So Are they a hot-blooded person? Are they a cold-blooded person? Are they sensitive to hot food? Do they crave sugar? Do they crave salt? Are they worse in the cold, damp weather? Do they wake up at 2 a.m. every day? Are they prone to getting pneumonia every year? Like, there's a million questions, which is why I spend 2 hours with each initial, because we really have to investigate and break this apart and figure out, number one, what they're sensitive to and how they react to it. But number two, and I would say the most important, and this is kind of what led me down the path that I've been on for the last 4 years, is what's the root cause? What is the cause?
Right.
And I can't even tell you, I'm a curious truth seeker. I want to know all the answers. I've always been like that, but you can feel it when something's true.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting how the path has changed for me so much since my daughter got sick with an autoimmune disease. I mean, I was feeding her all organic, and health was my jam. That's what I did.
Wow.
And then she got sick, and it definitely humbled me. It made me reevaluate my whole life, but it also led me down this path to figure out what is the root cause. How did she get this?
Because
Why
you were
is
doing all the right things,
exactly,
raising
and why
her
is
and
it that we're
feeding
getting
her.
sick when we think we're doing all of the right things?
Right.
And that's why I would say, it changed the way I practice. It changed the way I speak to my patients, the way I take a case. I listen a whole lot more. Um, Nobody knows their body better than you.
Yeah,
I
that's so
don't know
true.
your body.
Yeah.
So I think, it's really, really important to be open, to be able to hear things that might be triggering sometimes, and to be humble, to really not thinking about what the truth is, but what does that feel like? Does that feel like the truth? So, yeah.
I have to tell you, sleep has been a struggle for me since cancer and forced into menopause and giving up all my precious hormones. And then I interviewed a physician on my podcast, and he was talking about grounding sheets. And I thought, this sounds a little bit, I'll just say it, a little bit wackadoo to me. But I was so desperate to be a better sleeper that I thought, what do I have to lose? I dove into the research, and there are really good studies that show sleeping on grounding sheets will actually reduce your cortisol levels. When your cortisol levels are lower, you have lower levels of inflammation. You're more likely to be in a parasympathetic, which is a good state. And if all those things are happening, you're going to be sleeping deeper. So again, I did my research and I found the best brand I could on the market. They're organic. They're 80% organic. They're soft. And you know what? I can't tell I'm sleeping on a grounding sheet. I have heard that some grounding sheets can be very rough, and these are soft, and they just continue to get softer with every wash. So the brand I love is called Ground Lux. So go to the link in my show notes. You're going to see the link to Ground Lux, and then you need to use the code ENOS20 to get 20% off of your entire purchase, which is actually pretty incredible. They were running sales like that during Black Friday, but certainly not in January and February. So I'm feeling super grateful that they have given me this code through the end of February. So use the code ENOS20 to get 20% off of your grounding sheets at Ground Lux. Enjoy. What does the truth feel like in your body?
Sometimes it's goosebumps. I would say it's not words. It's a knowing. And it's a knowing that's led me my whole life. It's led me to homeopathy. It led me to my husband. It led me to knowing what's what. And I don't know what's what in a lot of cases. I feel like I'm in the infancy of knowing anything, but I also feel like that's the best place to be, because I have such a deep desire for truth that, some things I'll read and I'll just throw out. Some things I'll try and I'll throw out. Other things I'll try or I'll read or I'll hear and I'll go, That is truth.
Oh, I love that. I'm also a seeker of truth, and I couldn't agree more. It's you get the goosebumps. You just know when it's right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Sarah, so I'm going to make an assumption because I'm learning about homeopathy right now. But so a homeopathic physician like yourself, you're really comfortable with treating, sore throats and ear infections. But do you tackle the bigger things like the name of the podcast is Why Did I Get Cancer? So have you ever had a patient with cancer?
Yes, many. But again, I don't claim to cure cancer. I also, I feel quite strongly that, any homeopath you go to will say, I don't treat cancer. I treat the patient who has cancer, who happens to have this. So it's the same thing with a sore throat, the way you approach a case as you would approaching somebody with cancer. And I can remember over 10 years ago calling my homeopath and mentor, and saying, Joe, I have a patient with cancer. I can't treat cancer.
And being
And
terrified.
I was terrified and emotional. And he said, yes, you can. You're treating the patient. You take the case the same as you would anybody. You know how to do this. You know how to do this. And I think I still had, there was times in my career where cancer, it induces, the C word induces fear in
Oh, it
people.
does. Oh, I
Um,
was terrified when I heard the C
Absolutely.
word because I'd worked my whole life so that I would never have to hear the C word.
Right.
So when I heard
Yes.
the C word, I spiraled.
Yeah.
I spiraled. My husband spiraled.
And I
Yeah.
think that the thing is, there's a fear around that word. And so a lot of people would never go see a homeopath because the fear is quite created. It's,
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
have a fear of the diagnosis, of the death, of the treatment can be quite aggressive.
Quite
Um,
aggressive. Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
so, it just brings up so much fear for people. But I would say, I've had both patients who have had, lymphomas or breast cancer or bladder cancer, and some of them have chosen to go the medical route and come see me, and some of them have decided not to have any other treatment and just seek homeopathic treatment. And usually, those people are in the latter stages of their cancer, and they just want quality of life.
Okay.
Um, and I'm reticent about sharing some of my successes because um, I also don't want to give people this idea that I can cure cancer, because again, it's all about um, there's a number of variables. It's not just the physical. So homeopathy can help support the physical, but it also really, it addresses the emotional, and for me in the last 5 years, the spiritual components.
Hmm.
um, so those are really important to me, and I'm finding more and more they're really important to my patients. Whereas 10 years ago, I never would have talked to my stage 4 bladder cancer patient about spirituality or God. Whereas
Yeah.
now there's not a chance they would leave my office without us having a broader conversation about it.
How's that been going?
It's been going great. But again,
Really?
I absolutely. And I feel like part of what's being attracted to me now is that I do have a desire for God. I have a desire for God so deeply in my practice, in my family, in my life, that it is attracting people who also have that desire. And, maybe it's just that, but maybe also we're living in a time where people are actually hungry for God. They're
Yes.
hungry for
Yes.
deepening their connection to God and their relationship with God.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I went from somebody who, did my studies. I graduated with honors. I did fellowships. I did any classes I could take outside of my regular school in homeopathy to learn all the tools that I could have in my toolbox and miasms and all kinds of different ways to use homeopathy. But at the end of the day, I would say the most success I've ever seen was because in instances where I am open and the patient is open, there's just been this ability to figure it out together, right? Like
Yeah.
a more humility, I guess, is just such an important component to it.
And I think there's nothing like the desperation to be well,
Yeah.
to just bring you to your knees. So maybe you are open to more things
Yeah. Yeah.
than you would have been before the diagnosis. And
Yeah.
if you have patients who, as you said, stage 4 bladder or stage 3 this, even if you've never really heard the message of God, or you've turned away, there's nothing like desperation to bring you back.
Hmm. Or,
Yeah.
when you get that type of diagnosis, it's
Hmm.
it's faith shaking, right?
It is faith shaking for
So,
sure. Yeah.
unfortunately, like a lot of things that happen to us, we believe that God's causing those things, and God's not causing
Right.
those things
Right.
at all. It couldn't be further from the truth.
That's exactly
Um,
right.
but there are laws in place. I feel like there are laws in place that, and I mean, homeopaths have been looking at this for over 200 years. We don't take a case without taking an emotional profile.
Hmm.
So, I have 73 remedies that have the actual symptom ailments from long domination, or 53 remedies ailments from sexual abuse, or 29 remedies ailments from anger suppressed, because we talk backwards in
Really?
homeopathy, ailments from grief, ailments from um, violence or revenge, or the emotional components always come in homeopathy. So many years ago when Gabor Mate came on the scene, or Bernie Siegel, like all these guys are
Yeah.
amazing, and I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, so finally we have some actual physicians talking about how the emotions affect us, and they're
Hmm.
talking about cancer. It's really amazing to see that it's not just us lowly homeopaths that are looking
Right.
at how disease is affected by emotions and emotional suppression. Because the thing is as Gabor Mate has referenced, if you're in if you're in an unhappy marriage and you express your emotions, then you're more likely to not die. You're 4 times more likely to die if you're in an unhappy marriage and you don't express those emotions
Hmm.
and you keep it all bottled up. So, I've always used this analogy in my practice where holding in emotions, I mean, my son uses the analogy of farts are like emotions. And if you hold them in, you get pain. And that's a pretty good one. I love it.
Spoken like a
It's
true boy. Yes. That
but
is
again,
really
like
funny.
I've always used this analogy with my patients. Picture you have toxins or poison in your body and you have to vomit, right? Because
Hmm.
that's how the body heals itself. It
Yeah.
has this centrifugal reaction, pushes things from within to without, and you just cover your mouth. So the
Hmm.
vomit's coming up and you're covering your mouth. I mean, the
Wow.
backflow energetically in the body, and that is emotional suppression. And
Wow.
if we look at it on a broad scale, it's crazy how much we suppress our emotions on a day-to-day
It's
basis.
so true, Sarah. You're right. You're right.
But suppression's the name of the game in modern
Hmm.
medicine. Truly, I try not to reach for the Tylenol when I'm in pain, because I know there's something else that I need to address, that my body is calling out or trying to communicate something
Right.
that's being suppressed down. I don't necessarily want to take that away. I want to
Yeah.
listen and allow that outflow.
Right. Wow. Okay. So the emotional aspect of disease. I'm looking at this email that you sent me, and these are some of the things that we really wanted to talk about. Actually, I'm going to. Okay, so Sarah, we've talked about some of the physical causes of illness. two other topics, the emotional causes of illness and spiritual. I'd like to unpack those just a little bit more. And we talked about the emotional a little bit, the suppressed emotions. Do you have some examples with any of
Yeah.
your patients where you've seen that?
Yeah, I mean, the first patient I'll never forget was a little boy. He was 11 years old, and he was soiling himself. And we were trying to figure out, with all these remedies, the remedies weren't doing anything. They weren't helping him not soil himself. So
Mm.
we I decided with the mom that I would just have a conversation with him alone.
Mhm.
And so after having that conversation, I realized he would soil himself anytime his parents would get into an argument.
Mm.
So I gave him Ignatia, and the Ignatia actually stopped the soiling. And
Wow.
Ignatia is actually a remedy that's used for acute grief. And not only is it used for acute grief, but in homeopathic language is often sometimes old fashioned, but it was used for hysteria,
Yeah.
which was basically a physical manifestation of an emotional complaint.
Mhm.
And so anywhere you see a physical manifestation of an emotional complaint, Ignatia can be really helpful. It might not be the perfect remedy, but it could help. So in that case, it did. And so homeopaths would always look at this, like I said, an emotional side of things. And I would say that when my daughter got sick is really when I started to dive into root causes, like
Mhm.
what caused her illness. And
Mhm.
I would say at the end of the day, she was holding on to certain emotions that I had passed down to her and
Wow.
that I had been given that had been passed down to me. And I mean, Gabor Mate talks about this. There's been studies done in mice and how patterns of behavior are handed down. But I would say that more and more what we see is higher levels of suppression, i.e., pharmaceuticals, drugs, alcohol, smoking, video games, television,
Shopping,
working out,
porn, right.
shopping, all
Mhm.
of it. We just
Yep.
see this world is just full of anything that can distract us from our
Right.
emotions, that we see a really heavy load that children are carrying, you know?
Hmm.
And
Especially
that's why we
probably
see,
post COVID
yeah,
because
absolutely.
being sequestered for so long.
Yeah. Yeah. And not only that, I think that, there's just, maybe the pendulum is going to start swinging back at some point. I would love to see that. I know in Canada, with marijuana being legal, a lot of people call it medicinal. It's
Mhm.
actually quite suppressive, and it is
Oh,
addictive. And so, you know, I I'm very wary about anything that takes us away from actually feeling,
oh, that's
because
so good. You're
yeah,
right.
yeah. You can see that. You can see it. You can see it in parents and children. I mean, I actually have been working with well, she's a dear friend now, but I started working with her because I felt that she would be a good fit to share an office with. But for
Mhm.
over 10 years I've been working with Lisa Mackey, who's a counselor who does specifically emotional processing. So she helps to guide a patient on how to, first of all, tap into their emotions if they're highly suppressed, and then
Mhm.
how to process them out of their body,
Wow.
right? And
Wow.
it's
Because
just,
that's so if you do that, or when you do that, you it sounds like you're probably setting your body up to be healthier.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you see suppressed emotions? I'm sure you do. I probably know the answer to this, but I'm just gonna
That's okay.
I'll do a pretend
Ask
question. How
away.
about that? Do you see suppressed emotions? And you'd mentioned you had a stage 4 bladder cancer or in breast cancer, like I had.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I would say, there's not just in homeopathy where you see certain remedies as a reflection of certain suppressed emotions, but Louise Hay was a pioneer of
Hmm.
linking emotions to certain parts of the body, and now we see Gabor Mate talking about different personalities who would get cancer, or
Hmm.
different pathologies. But I would say that I've been able to garner some deeper knowledge around breast cancer specifically, and that is there's this over nurturing emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually goes quite deep. Oftentimes it can be towards the mother, or it can be passed down from grandmother to mother to child. But it's basically this need to be loved, and a demand, and actually a rage of over nurturing and having to over nurture to get loved.
Mm.
And the right side is related. I don't know if you resonate with that.
I do.
I could feel some emotion come up in me.
Yes, yes. Over
Mhm.
nurturing, which, let's call it what it is. I'll just say it in my case, it's people pleasing.
People pleasing. And
Yep.
that's why we see such a higher incidence of breast cancer in our culture, because
Yeah.
not only is this emotion inherited oftentimes, like a
Mm.
feeling of a desire to be loved. Like, think of the breast as the place that nurturing starts. I mean, the
Right.
womb, but the breast. And then think about it as like putting, if you don't nurture, you won't get loved. And so you
Mm.
put everything of yourself. And we see this so much with women nowadays. You know, women are expected to not only work and not only parent, but, you know, to run the household and to plan the trips and to clean the house and to make the dinners and do all of the things and be a good friend and support their parents who are elderly. And all of it is very, very unloving to the self.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is really unloving to the self. And I'll just say in my case that, you overgive or over nurture, and then it's not reciprocated. And then you move into resentment.
Yeah. Anger.
Yes. So resentment and anger go hand in hand.
Yes.
Okay.
And you know, it would be sort of layers of this, you know, this
Yeah.
feeling of deep grief,
Mm-hmm.
um, because you have to do in order to get love, and then resentment because you're not getting love no matter how much you put in.
Yeah.
Um,
That I can really see that in my life, especially in the career that I've chosen, that was chosen for me, which is health and wellness and nutrition. And so I was already a nurturer. But then once I got my degree and experience, I wanted everybody to be well in my life and to take my advice on food and nutrition and exercise and all those things. And then when they didn't, some people really close to me, I think I would probably look at it as, don't you love me enough to want to make these changes? Don't you want to stay healthy and
yeah.
be on the planet for longer?
Hmm.
And I think I probably took it really personally. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's powerful.
Yeah, I didn't expect to share that.
Well, it's powerful and it's beautiful. And you know, I don't know which breast was affected or if both
My
were
left
affected.
breast.
Okay, so that's generally related to women.
Yeah.
That's the feminine side. So, you
Yeah.
know, you're looking for that nurturing from women, and you're giving all of yourself
Mm.
in order to feel loved. And you know, a great way to process that emotion would be to not nurture for like 6 months. Don't nurture anybody.
Mhm. Oh,
and
Sarah,
and
that's
it's
sounding really good right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, and what that's going to do is it's actually going to bring up all these emotions of needing to be loved, and it's going to be really painful and dirty and messy, but you have God, and you'll move through it. You just
Yeah.
have to allow yourself with your faith to be overwhelmed by that emotion, and it will move out of your body layer by layer.
How could I be different in your opinion if I did that?
Oh, I think you would see huge differences. I think that you would approach helping
Mm-hmm.
from a much more loving perspective. It would always feel right. or wrong. And you would be able to say no very quickly, and not feel bad about it. There wouldn't be guilt associated with that. You would be able to set boundaries for yourself, and you wouldn't carry this resentment with you. You would actually feel quite loving towards people and not taking things as personally. You know, it's layer upon layer. So I always say to people, when you feel an emotion come up, and I don't always do this. If anything, I avoid a lot of emotions a lot of the time, but there's an awareness, right? And it's been a process for me, and I'm still where like I said, I'm at
We're all a work in progress.
But I do feel like the truth is, if we allow these emotions to come up and out of us, things change drastically.
Happy 2025, everybody, and happy healthier eating in 2025. And, it's the time of year where everybody says, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. So let's make it simple. And one of my goals in 2025 is to eat more fish. There's a lot of reasons for that. Higher levels of anti-inflammatory nutrients, including a lot of really good omega-3 fatty acids. I had never really been a good fish preparer at home, so I would usually just eat fish when I go to a restaurant. But I got to tell you, I have got a wonderful salmon recipe that I got from a chef. I'm going to tag it in the show notes. But here's the other thing is I want to eat wild caught Alaskan salmon. And it's not easy to find. And then what I also discovered is that wild Alaskan salmon in supermarkets is double frozen. So it's frozen on the ship when it's caught, and then it's defrosted, and then it's frozen again. When I found that out, I was really upset and irritated, because when you freeze and unfreeze, the nutrient content is going to change. So I asked my contacts at ButcherBox. They freeze the fish one time. That is it. What that means is it's going to be a higher nutrient content, and the texture is going to be better when you cook it. So I think maybe I'll just blame my bad fishing techniques, my bad cooking of the fish techniques, on the fact that it was frozen twice. So can I just do that? But anyway, back to ButcherBox. In my show notes, you will see a great deal from ButcherBox for my community. And what it is it's $20 off of your first box, but it's free wild Alaskan sockeye salmon for a year in every box. And it's a $422 value. So I get free fish for a year. It's over a $400 value. That's a pretty amazing thing. So if you go to butcherbox.com/Enos, you're going to see this great deal. It's probably not going to last very long, because that is a lot of free fish to be giving away. So again, my New Year's resolution, which I don't make very often, is to eat more fish in 2025. I'm trying to do this twice a week, so come and join me. Well, I hope you learned as much as I did. I had so many takeaways from today's podcast. Part 1, please join us next week for part 2 with homeopathic physician Dr. Sarah Trask. Enjoy. Hey, y'all, can you do me a favor today and go and leave a review of this podcast? I know that the more great reviews, wink, wink, emphasis on great, reviews that I get, along with more downloads and more subscribers, that pushes this podcast out to people who might normally not even find it. And the reason I started this podcast, and my real heart for starting this podcast, is that I needed this information. It wasn't available. And so I started a podcast so that I could be a blessing to others. So you're a blessing to me just by being here. And again, thank you for your support. Thank you for your positive reviews and all of the notes that you send me. And also just wanted to say, hey, keep in mind, I'm not a doctor. And if you need medical advice, please reach out to your team. That is going to be just the best source for you, because they know you. So again, I hope you enjoyed this podcast.